My name is Eleanor, I'm 68 years old, and I never thought my retirement would start with such heartbreak. After 40 years as a nurse, I used my life savings to buy my son Jackson and his wife Stephanie a beautiful luxury home. The joy in their eyes made every penny worth it, until the housewarming party when they uttered those words I'll never forget. Thanks for the house, but we don't need you now. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family betrayal and redemption. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, the daughter of hardworking parents who taught me the value of every dollar earned. My father worked at the local factory for 35 years, and my mother was a schoolteacher. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they provided a stable, loving home for me and my two siblings. Their example of diligence and financial responsibility shaped who I became. At 23, I graduated from nursing school and started my career at Memorial Hospital. That's where I met Thomas, a kind-hearted radiology technician with the most gentle smile I'd ever seen. We married after just 1 year of dating. Thomas used to say, "When you know," and he was right. Our marriage lasted 40 wonderful years until cancer took him from me 5 years ago. Throughout our marriage, Thomas and I lived modestly. We bought a small 3-bedroom home in a middle-class neighborhood where we raised our only son Jackson. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was always filled with love. We drove the same cars for over a decade, packed lunches instead of eating out, and took camping trips rather than extravagant vacations. Every extra penny went into our retirement fund and Jackson's college savings. Jackson was a bright, loving child. From the moment he was born, he became the center of our universe. Thomas would spend hours teaching him to throw a baseball in the backyard, and I read to him every night before bed. He excelled in school and made us proud when he was accepted to State University on a partial academic scholarship. We covered the rest of his tuition without complaint, happy to give him the opportunity we never had. During his sophomore year at college, Jackson met Stephanie in his economics class. The first time he brought her home for Thanksgiving, I noticed how her eyes widened when she entered our modest house. She was polite but seemed to be assessing everything around her. Stephanie came from a wealthier family, with a father in investment banking and a mother who didn't need to work. Despite my initial concerns about their different backgrounds, Jackson seemed smitten, and as a mother, I wanted him to be happy. Their relationship progressed quickly. After graduation, Jackson proposed with a ring that cost him 3 months' salary from his entry-level accounting job. When they announced their engagement, Stephanie immediately began planning an elaborate wedding. The budget she proposed was astronomical to me, but when I saw Jackson's pleading eyes, I couldn't say no. Thomas had passed away just a year earlier, and I wanted this happy occasion to help heal our family's grief. I withdrew $20,000 from my savings to help pay for their special day. The wedding was beautiful but ostentatious by my standards. Stephanie had 6 bridesmaids in designer dresses, and the reception was held at an exclusive country club. Throughout the event, I felt somewhat out of place among Stephanie's family and friends, who all seemed to live much more lavish lifestyles than I was accustomed to. But seeing Jackson happy made it worthwhile. After the wedding, Jackson and Stephanie moved into a small apartment in the city where they both worked. Jackson had secured a good position at an accounting firm, and Stephanie worked in marketing. Despite their combined income, they struggled to save for a house in their desired neighborhood. Property values had skyrocketed, and they complained constantly about their tiny apartment, which was actually quite nice in my opinion. For 2 years, I listened to their housing woes during our Sunday phone calls. Stephanie would often mention friends who had purchased homes with help from their parents. The hints became increasingly less subtle. Janet's parents gave them their down payment as a wedding gift, she would say, or Mark's dad co-signed their mortgage so they could get that beautiful colonial in Oakwood. Meanwhile, I was rattling around in the family home alone, finding it increasingly difficult to maintain. After much thought, I decided to sell our house and use the proceeds, along with most of my retirement savings, to help Jackson and Stephanie buy a home. Thomas would have wanted me to help our son, and I reasoned that I could live comfortably in a small apartment with what remained of my pension. When I told Jackson my plan over dinner one evening, his eyes filled with tears. He hugged me tightly and promised that this generosity would not be forgotten. Stephanie squealed with delight and immediately began browsing luxury listings on her phone. I was taken aback by the caliber of home she was considering, but I remained silent. This was my gift to them and I wanted them to be happy. The house hunting process began with enthusiasm. Stephanie had hired Agnes, a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. I had initially envisioned helping them purchase a sensible starter home, perhaps in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. However, Stephanie had other ideas. The first weekend, Agnes showed us properties starting at $800,000. These are gorgeous but perhaps out of our budget, I suggested gently as we toured a 5-bedroom colonial with marble countertops and a 3-car garage. But Mom, you sold your house for $350,000, and you mentioned having retirement savings, Jackson said, his voice tinged with disappointment. Plus, we want room to grow our family, Stephanie added, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. They weren't expecting yet, but the implication was clear. After viewing 12 properties over 3 weekends, we found it. A stunning 4-bedroom home in Lakeside Estates, the most prestigious neighborhood in town. The house featured soaring ceilings, hardwood floors, a gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, and a backyard that overlooked a small lake. The asking price, $1,200,000. This is it, Stephanie declared, her eyes gleaming as she spun around in the spacious living room. I can already imagine our Christmas tree right here by the windows. Jackson looked to me anxiously. The price tag was nearly everything I had, but the joy on his face weakened my resolve. I had always been frugal, always saved for tomorrow. But at 68, how many tomorrows did I have left? Wouldn't it be worth it to see my son and his wife happy in a beautiful home where they could raise my future grandchildren? If this is the one you love, then we'll make it happen, I said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and financial transactions. I liquidated my investments and combined the funds with the proceeds from my house sale. Agnes advised that in the competitive market, an all-cash offer would be most attractive to the sellers. Since I was providing all the money, the initial paperwork listed me as the sole owner, with plans to transfer the title to Jackson and Stephanie after closing. We'll handle the transfer after you're settled in, I told them. For now, this makes the purchase process simpler. Neither of them objected. In fact, they seemed too busy planning renovations and purchasing furniture to pay much attention to the legal details. The day we got the keys was magical. Jackson lifted Stephanie over the threshold like a newlywed, and she laughed with pure joy. I stood in the driveway watching them, my heart full despite my now empty bank account. They ran from room to room like children, making plans for each space. The media room will go here, Jackson said, gesturing to a space off the living room. And we'll need to replace these light fixtures, Stephanie added, wrinkling her nose at the crystal chandelier that I actually thought was quite elegant. I had reserved $15,000 to furnish a small apartment for myself, but seeing their excitement, I impulsively offered to help with furniture for their new home. Really, Mom? That would be amazing. Jackson hugged me tightly. The next week was spent shopping for furniture and decor. Stephanie had expensive taste, gravitating toward designer pieces that made me wince at the price tags. But I kept my concerns to myself, nodding and smiling as the delivery appointments were scheduled and my credit card was charged. As the housewarming party approached, I threw myself into helping with preparations. I baked cookies and prepared appetizers in their gleaming new kitchen. I helped Stephanie arrange flowers and set up the bar. The house was truly stunning now, furnished with elegant pieces that complemented the architecture perfectly. The night before the party, as I was leaving to return to the hotel where I was staying temporarily, Jackson walked me to my car. Mom, I just want you to know how grateful I am, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Dad would be so proud of you for helping us like this. His words warmed my heart, and I drove back to my hotel room feeling that every penny spent had been worthwhile. I fell asleep dreaming of Sunday dinners in that beautiful kitchen, of grandchildren playing in the backyard, of holidays around a table large enough for our growing family. The house would be the gathering place I had always wanted for us, even without Thomas. The morning of the housewarming party arrived with perfect weather, sunshine streaming through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the pristine lawn of the luxury home. I had been up since 5 o'clock, preparing additional appetizers and making sure everything would be perfect for Jackson and Stephanie's special day. I arrived at the house at 9, my car trunk filled with trays of food and the special champagne flutes I had purchased as my housewarming gift to them. Stephanie answered the door in her silk bathrobe, coffee cup in hand. Her smile seemed forced as she stepped aside to let me in. "You're here early," she said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "I wanted to help set up before guests arrive," I explained, carrying my first load of food to the kitchen. "Where would you like these trays?" "Just put them anywhere," she replied dismissively. "The caterer is coming at 11. "Caterer?" I paused, confused. I thought we agreed I'd handle the food. "I've been cooking for 2 days. We upgraded," Stephanie said with a shrug. "This is an important event, and we want everything to be perfect." The word upgraded stung, implying my home-cooked offerings weren't good enough for their sophisticated friends. I swallowed my hurt and nodded, placing my carefully prepared dishes on the counter. Jackson came downstairs then, dressed in sweatpants and a university t-shirt. He gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Morning, Mom. You're here early." "That's what I said," Stephanie muttered, pouring more coffee. Throughout the morning I tried to make myself useful, arranging flowers and setting up the bar area. Stephanie followed behind me, rearranging everything I touched. The caterers arrived, bringing elaborate displays that made my homemade appetizers look amateur by comparison. Stephanie instructed them to place my food in the kitchen, away from the main entertaining areas. By noon, I was feeling distinctly unwelcome in the house I had purchased. I retreated to the guest bathroom to gather my composure, reminding myself that this day was about Jackson and Stephanie, not me. When I emerged, the first guests were arriving, a couple I didn't recognize carrying an expensive-looking gift bag. "Barbara, Frank, welcome." Stephanie embraced them warmly. "Let me give you the tour of our new home." Our new home. Not the home Eleanor generously gave us, or even our new home that we're so grateful for. Just our new home, as if they had purchased it themselves. As more guests arrived, I noticed they were almost exclusively Stephanie's friends and colleagues, with a few of Jackson's work associates mixed in. None of my friends had been invited, not even Margaret, who had known Jackson since he was born. I stood awkwardly by the cheese display, smiling politely whenever someone made eye contact, but few people approached me. An hour into the party, I overheard Stephanie giving a tour to a group of women. The mortgage was a stretch, but Jackson's new promotion made it possible, she was saying. "We fell in love with the lake view and knew we had to have it." I nearly choked on my sparkling water. Mortgage? Promotion? These were outright lies. I had paid for the house in cash, every penny of it mine. Before I could process this deception, I heard more. "We're planning to convert the 4th bedroom into a nursery," she continued, patting her stomach suggestively. The women cooed and exchanged knowing glances. By 3 o'clock, the house was filled with about 40 guests, all mingling and admiring the home. Jackson clinked a glass, calling for everyone's attention. He stood on the second step of the grand staircase, Stephanie beaming beside him. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this milestone with us," he began. "Stephanie and I are thrilled to welcome you to our new home." I smiled encouragingly, expecting him to acknowledge my contribution. Instead, he continued. "With hard work and some smart investments, we've been able to achieve our dream of living in lakeside estates." My smile froze. Not a word about me. Not a single acknowledgement of the sacrifice I had made. I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me as the guests applauded. After the toast, I made my way to Jackson in the kitchen where he was refilling ice buckets. "Jackson, sweetheart, I noticed you didn't mention that the house was a gift from me," I said quietly, trying to keep my tone light. He glanced around nervously. "Oh well, Stephanie thought it might be awkward to discuss finances in front of everyone." "Awkward? But everyone thinks you purchased this house yourselves. Stephanie even mentioned a mortgage." Before he could respond, Stephanie walked in, her face tightening when she saw us talking privately. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "I was just telling Jackson that I'm surprised you're telling people you bought this house," I said directly. Stephanie's demeanor changed instantly. The pleasant hostess disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Look, Eleanor, she said, using my first name rather than Mom, as she usually did in Jackson's presence. We appreciate the help with the down payment, but it's better if our friends don't know the details. Down payment? Stephanie, I paid for the entire house. Every penny of it. Mom, please lower your voice, Jackson said, looking anxiously toward the door to the dining room where guests were mingling. I don't understand what's happening here, I said, my voice shaking. This house is actually still in my name. We haven't even transferred the title yet. Something flashed in Stephanie's eyes, alarm, quickly replaced by calculation. About that, she said, her voice hardening. We've been meaning to talk to you, Jackson, and I feel it would be best if you weren't so involved in our lives going forward. What do you mean? I asked, though a sickening feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. We're starting our family here. We need our space. The constant visits, the opinions on our decor, the food you keep bringing over. It's too much. I've visited exactly 3 times since you got the keys 2 weeks ago, I said incredulously. It feels like more, Stephanie said dismissively. The point is, we appreciate the gift, but now we need boundaries. I looked to Jackson, waiting for him to defend me, to remind his wife of the sacrifice I had made. He stared at the floor, silent. Jackson, I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. He finally met my eyes, and I saw something there that broke my heart. Not the love of a son for his mother, but the weak compliance of a man afraid to stand up to his wife. Mom, we're grateful for your help, really we are. But Stephanie's right. We need to establish our own household without interference. Interference. I repeated the word like a slap. Is that what you call my love and support? You know what she means, Stephanie cut in. Thanks for the house, but we don't need you now. The words hung in the air between us, brutal in their clarity. 40 years of motherhood reduced to a transaction, house provided, services no longer required. I think you should leave, Stephanie continued, glancing at her watch. Our friends from the country club will be arriving soon, and this scene is inappropriate. Jackson, I pleaded, turning to my son. Are you going to let her speak to me this way? After everything? He looked torn for a moment, a flash of the boy I raised visible in his conflicted expression. Then Stephanie placed her hand on his arm, and his face hardened. It's probably best if you go, Mom. We can talk about this another time. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend that my own son was asking me to leave a house that legally belonged to me. During a party celebrating a home I had sacrificed everything to provide. When I didn't move, Jackson took my elbow gently but firmly. I'll walk you out. In a daze, I allowed him to guide me through the crowded living room. Curious eyes followed us, conversations pausing as guests sensed the tension. My cheeks burned with humiliation as Jackson opened the front door and practically pushed me onto the porch. We'll call you tomorrow, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Then the door closed, and I was alone, standing outside the $1 million home I had purchased, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and music inside. A neighbor walking his dog gave me a curious glance as tears began streaming down my face. I stumbled to my car, fumbling with the keys as my vision blurred. Somehow, I managed to drive away from Lakeside Estates, away from the beautiful house by the lake, away from the son who had just broken my heart. That first night alone was the hardest. I checked into a modest hotel room, the same one I'd been staying in since selling my house. Earlier, it had felt like a temporary inconvenience on the way to a new beginning. Now, surrounded by my few remaining possessions in a sterile room that smelled of industrial cleaner, the reality of my situation crashed down on me. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the floral dress I'd chosen so carefully for the housewarming, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. Great, heaving sobs racked my body as I replayed the day's events. The coldness in Stephanie's eyes, the weakness in Jackson's, the terrible words. Thanks for the house, but we don't need you now. How had I raised a son who could treat me this way? Where had I gone wrong? I had always taught Jackson to be kind, to be grateful, to value family above material things. Yet he had stood there and allowed his wife to dismiss me from a house that I had purchased with my life savings. as if I were an unwanted guest rather than the legal owner and his mother. Around midnight, I tried calling Jackson. The call went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I possibly say? An hour later, I tried again with the same result. Either his phone was off, or he was deliberately avoiding my calls. Both possibilities hurt equally. I barely slept that night, and when the morning light filtered through the thin hotel curtains, I felt hollow and disoriented. My first thought was to call Jackson again, to demand an explanation or an apology. But as I reached for my phone, a text message appeared from him. Sorry about yesterday. Stephanie was stressed about the party. We'll talk soon. No acknowledgement of what they had done. No real apology. Just an excuse and a vague promise of future conversation. I put the phone down without responding. Later that morning, Margaret called. My best friend for over 30 years, she had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong. Eleanor? You sound terrible. What's happened? The concern in her voice broke through my shock, and I found myself telling her everything between renewed bouts of tears. Those ungrateful, entitled. Margaret didn't finish her sentence, but I could hear the rage on my behalf. You need to talk to a lawyer immediately. That house is yours. I can't sue my own son, I protested weakly. Watch me, Margaret replied. If you won't protect yourself, I'll do it for you. By the afternoon, Margaret had arrived at my hotel room with sandwiches, coffee, and the business card of her cousin Alfred, a real estate attorney. Despite my reluctance, she insisted I call him right away. Alfred was direct and professional. After listening to my story, he confirmed what I already knew. The house was legally mine. The paperwork was clear. I had paid in full, and the title was in my name alone. What do you want to do, Mrs. Williams? Alfred asked after explaining my options. I don't know, I admitted. I bought that house for Jackson and Stephanie. I wanted them to have a beautiful home to raise their family. And they repaid your generosity by humiliating you and throwing you out. Alfred reminded me gently. You're not obligated to give them a free house after that. He was right, of course. But the thought of taking legal action against my only child made me physically ill. I asked Alfred to give me time to think. For the next few days, I moved through life like a ghost. I extended my stay at the hotel and began half-heartedly looking at apartment rentals online. Jackson didn't call, though he sent another text asking if I was still upset. The casualness of it, as if he'd merely forgotten my birthday rather than participated in one of the most hurtful experiences of my life, left me speechless. Margaret checked on me daily, bringing food I couldn't eat and offering support I couldn't fully accept. She had known me since before Jackson was born, had been there through Thomas's illness and death, and now she watched helplessly as I retreated into myself. You've always put everyone else first, Eleanor, she said one evening as we sat in my hotel room. Thomas Jackson, your patient's at the hospital. When are you going to put yourself first? Her words resonated but didn't quite break through the fog of grief that surrounded me. I kept thinking of Jackson as a child, his first steps, his school plays, the way he'd curl against me during thunderstorms. How had that sweet boy grown into a man who could discard his mother so easily? By the 5th day, I had developed a persistent headache and couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten a proper meal. Margaret threatened to drag me to the emergency room if I didn't start taking care of myself. What would Thomas say if he could see you like this? She demanded, placing a sandwich in front of me and refusing to leave until I'd taken at least 3 bites. The mention of my late husband brought fresh tears. Thomas had been gone for 5 years, but I still reached for him instinctively in times of trouble. He would have known what to do. He would have been furious with Jackson, would have driven straight to that house and demanded an explanation. Thomas would tell you to stop being a doormat, Margaret continued, correctly interpreting my thoughts. He adored you for your generous heart, but he also admired your strength. Where's that strength now, Eleanor? Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself looking through old photo albums I had saved from the house. Pictures of Thomas holding newborn Jackson. Jackson's first birthday, his face covered in cake frosting. Family vacations, graduations, ordinary moments of a life built on love and sacrifice. In one photo, taken when Jackson was about 7, he proudly displayed a savings account booklet. We had opened his first bank account with birthday money from relatives, and Thomas had used it as an opportunity to teach him about saving and the value of money. Jackson had been so proud to make his first deposit, to watch his small sum grow with each allowance saved. What had happened to those lessons? When had material possessions become more important to my son than integrity and gratitude? The next morning, I called Alfred and asked him to draw up an eviction notice. My hand trembled as I signed the document later that day, but Margaret stood beside me, her hand firm on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she assured me. "They need to learn there are consequences for treating people this way." The official notice was delivered to the house the following day, exactly 1 week after the disastrous housewarming party. I waited in my hotel room, both dreading and hoping for Jackson's call. The phone rang at 6:45 that evening. Jackson's name flashed on the screen, and my heart pounded as I answered. "Mom." His voice was frantic, higher pitched than normal. "Mom, what's going on? Some guy just came to the door with legal papers saying we're being evicted. There must be a mistake." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "It's not a mistake, Jackson." "What do you mean?" "Mom, we have been evicted from the house. Help." In the background, I could hear Stephanie's voice, shrill and demanding. "Let me talk to her. This is ridiculous." "Mom, Stephanie wants to speak with you," Jackson said, his voice uncertain. "No," replied firmly. "This conversation is between you and me, Jackson. I paid for that house. Still in my name. I never transferred the title to you because, frankly, you never gave me the chance before throwing me out of my own property." There was a moment of stunned silence before Jackson found his voice again. But you bought it for us." "It was a gift." "A gift given with certain expectations," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. "Namely, basic respect and gratitude." "We are grateful," he protested. "Things just got out of hand at the party. Stephanie was stressed, and dash." "Stop making excuses," I interrupted, my patience finally exhausted. "You and Stephanie deliberately lied to your guests about how you acquired that house. You allowed her to speak to me with contempt. And then you escorted me out like an unwanted trespasser. From a house that I own." "Mom, please." Jackson's voice took on the wheedling tone he had used as a teenager when asking for something expensive. "We can talk about this. We can work it out." In the background, Stephanie was becoming more agitated. "Tell her we'll sue. Tell her she can't do this." "Actually, I can," I said loudly enough for both of them to hear. Alfred explained the legal situation quite clearly. "The house is mine. There was never a contract stating it was a gift, never any paperwork transferring ownership to you. Legally, you've been living rent-free in my property, and now I'm exercising my right to reclaim it." "Mom," Jackson's voice cracked. "Where are we supposed to go?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My son, my only child, was asking where he would live. Every maternal instinct urged me to backtrack, to comfort him, to solve his problem as I had done his entire life. But Margaret's words echoed in my mind. "When are you going to put yourself first? You have a good job, Jackson. You and Stephanie have 2 incomes and no children yet. You'll figure it out, just like most young couples do, without a free $1 million house." "I can't believe you're doing this to your own son," he said, anger replacing his initial shock. "After everything we've been through, after Dad died dash. Don't you dare use your father's memory to manipulate me." I cut in, my voice shaking with emotion. "Your father would be ashamed of how you've behaved. He taught you better than this." That silenced him momentarily. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, becoming calculating. "Mom, listen, we're sorry about what happened. Really sorry. We were caught up in impressing our friends and things got out of hand. But we've learned our lesson. We'll make it up to you." I could almost see him the way he looked as a child when caught in a lie, eyes wide with false innocence, saying whatever was necessary to avoid consequences. "I'm sure you are sorry now," I replied. "Now that you realize the house isn't yours after all." "That's not fair. We were going to call you tomorrow anyway to apologize." "Were you?" Interesting timing, considering the eviction notice arrived today. In the background, Stephanie had moved from anger to tears. "What about all our furniture?" We've spent thousands decorating. The furniture is yours, I confirmed. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings from my house. Anything left behind after that will be considered abandoned property. 48 hours? Jackson's voice rose in panic. That's impossible. We can't find a new place and move everything in 2 days. You managed to plan and execute an entire housewarming party in less time, I pointed out. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Mom, please. Jackson's voice softened, becoming the voice of my little boy again. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But don't punish us like this. Where's your compassion? The question struck me as so profoundly ironic that I almost laughed. Where was his compassion when he watched his wife dismiss me from the house I had purchased? Where was his compassion when he chose her cruel words over our lifetime bond? My compassion has limits, Jackson. So does my forgiveness. The house is mine. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings. And if we refuse to leave? There was a hint of defiance in his tone now. Then I'll have no choice but to proceed with a formal eviction through the courts, which will be public record and could affect your credit rating and future rental applications. Is that what you want? Stephanie was sobbing loudly now. I heard her say something about calling her parents. Mom, we can't just lose everything like this, Jackson pleaded. Please reconsider. We'll do anything. The house is mine, I repeated firmly. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings. That's my final word on the subject. Before he could respond, I ended the call, my hand trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Immediately it rang again. I declined the call. Then again. And again. I finally turned it off completely, collapsing onto the hotel bed as the adrenaline drained from my body. Had I done the right thing? The question tormented me as I lay there, staring at the ceiling. I had never spoken to Jackson that way before, never denied him anything he truly wanted. But the memory of that housewarming party, of the casual cruelty with which I had been dismissed, strengthened my resolve. Margaret called an hour later on the hotel room phone, having been unable to reach my cell. How did it go? She asked anxiously. I did it, I said, my voice hollow with emotional exhaustion. I told them they have 48 hours to move out. Good for you, Margaret said firmly. And how do you feel? Terrible, I admitted. Like the worst mother in the world. You're not, she assured me. You're finally teaching Jackson a valuable lesson about consequences. It's a lesson that's long overdue. We talked for another hour, Margaret bolstering my wavering resolve each time I questioned my decision. By the time we hung up, I felt marginally more confident in my choice, though the ache in my heart remained. That night I dreamed of Thomas. We were sitting on the porch of our old house, watching a younger Jackson play in the yard. You're doing the right thing, Ellie, Dream Thomas said, using his old nickname for me. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. I woke with tears on my cheeks but a strange sense of peace in my heart. The path forward was painful but clear. For perhaps the first time in my adult life I was putting my own well-being first. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, I woke with a newfound sense of determination. After a week of barely functioning, I showered, dressed carefully, and applied makeup for the first time since the housewarming disaster. Margaret picked me up for breakfast at a local cafe, commenting on the change in my demeanor. You look like yourself again, she said, studying my face across the table. Like the Eleanor I've known for 30 years. I feel different, I admitted. Still sad, still hurt, but clearer somehow. After breakfast, Alfred called with an update. He had installed a security system with cameras at the house, allowing me to monitor the situation remotely without having to be physically present during the move-out period. He also advised me to stay at the hotel until Jackson and Stephanie had vacated the premises, to avoid any potential confrontation. Through the security camera feed on my tablet, I watched as a parade of vehicles arrived at the house throughout the day. Stephanie's parents came first, their luxury SUV followed by a moving truck. Then Jackson's friends from college, their cars and pickup trucks lined up along the curb. The frantic activity continued well into the evening, with furniture and boxes streaming out the front door. Jackson called several times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. He offered apologies, promises to make amends, even suggesting family counseling. In his final message, his voice cracking with emotion, he asked for an extension on the move-out deadline. "Mom, we've got most of our stuff, but the movers can't come for the larger furniture until tomorrow afternoon. Please call me back. Please." After consulting with Alfred, I texted Jackson a brief extension. "You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow. Not a minute longer." His reply came instantly. "Thank you. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything." The words should have soothed me, but they felt hollow, motivated by desperation rather than genuine remorse. Still, I found myself hoping that this harsh lesson might eventually lead to real growth and understanding. By the second evening, the security cameras showed an empty driveway. Alfred drove by the house and confirmed that Jackson and Stephanie had indeed vacated the premises, though they had left the place in disarray. Furniture marks on the walls, nail holes where artwork had hung, debris scattered across the floors. "It's nothing that can't be fixed," Alfred assured me. "The important thing is they're out. The locksmith has changed all the locks, and the property is secure. It's yours now, Eleanor. Truly yours." The next morning, I stood on the front steps of the luxury home, key in hand, my stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. I had purchased this house for Jackson and Stephanie, had imagined them raising my grandchildren here. Never once had I considered it might become my home instead. The foyer echoed with my footsteps as I entered. Without the elegant furniture Stephanie had selected, the house felt cavernous and impersonal. But as I moved from room to room, opening curtains to let in the spring sunshine, I began to see possibilities rather than just emptiness. The master bedroom, with its wall of windows overlooking the lake, could be my sanctuary. The gourmet kitchen, far larger than any I had ever cooked in, offered space for entertaining. The backyard, with its gently sloping lawn down to the water's edge, would be perfect for gardening, a hobby I had abandoned years ago due to lack of time. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into making the house my own. I hired cleaners to erase the traces of Jackson and Stephanie's hasty departure. I selected furniture that reflected my more traditional taste, rather than Stephanie's ultramodern aesthetic. I planted flower beds along the front walkway and started a vegetable garden in a sunny corner of the backyard. Margaret helped me decorate, offering suggestions and accompaniment on shopping trips. "This place suits you," she declared one afternoon as we arranged books on the built-in shelves in the study. "I never would have pictured you in a luxury home, but you belong here, Eleanor." Her words surprised me, but as I looked around at the space that was gradually reflecting my personality, I realized she was right. After decades of putting others first, of living modestly and saving carefully, there was a certain poetic justice in my unexpected upgrade. The neighbors, initially curious about the sudden change in occupancy, proved to be welcoming. Barbara and Richard Miller from next door brought over a homemade pie one Sunday afternoon. "We saw what happened at the housewarming," Barbara admitted as we sat on my new patio furniture. "It seemed terribly unfair, the way they treated you." Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood about my situation. Rather than the judgment I had feared, I found sympathy and support. Several neighbors had witnessed my humiliating departure from the party and had drawn their own conclusions about Jackson and Stephanie's character. "Young people today," Richard said, shaking his head. "No respect for sacrifice." As spring turned to summer, I settled into a routine in my new home. I joined the neighborhood garden club, volunteered at the local library, and even began working one day a week at a free clinic, using my nursing skills to help those in need. The house that had been the site of my greatest heartbreak gradually became a place of healing and new connections. Jackson continued to call periodically. Our conversations were brief and stilted, his apologies sounding increasingly genuine as the reality of his situation sank in. He and Stephanie had moved into a small apartment, he reported, and were learning to live within their means. Stephanie had lost her marketing job in a company downsizing, adding financial strain to their already tense relationship. I listened politely but maintained my emotional distance, not yet ready to risk the vulnerability of forgiveness. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too profound. One unexpected joy came in the form of Arthur Davidson, a widower who had recently moved into the house across the street. We met at a neighborhood association meeting and discovered a shared love of classical music and British mystery novels. Arthur, a retired professor with kind eyes and a quick wit, began stopping by with fresh tomatoes from his garden or recommendations for books he thought I might enjoy. "I haven't seen you smile like that in months," Margaret observed after Arthur had joined us for dinner one evening. "He's good for you. We're just friends," I protested, though the warmth in my cheeks betrayed something more. "For now," Margaret replied with a knowing smile. For months after moving into the lakeside house, I was deadheading roses in my front garden when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. My heart constricted as Jackson stepped out, looking thinner and more subdued than I remembered. "Mom," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I was hoping we could talk." I gestured to the porch swing, removing my gardening gloves as I led the way. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Jackson spoke. "The house looks different," he observed. "It suits you." "Thank you," I replied, waiting for him to continue. "Stephanie and I separated last month," he said finally, staring at his hands. "She's moved back in with her parents." The news didn't surprise me as much as it might have once. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" He looked up, his expression wry. "You never liked her much." "I wanted to," I said honestly. "For your sake." Another silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words. From inside the house, the grandfather clock I had salvaged from my old home chimed 3 times. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Jackson continued. "About what happened, about the kind of person I've become." He swallowed hard. "I'm ashamed, Mum. Deeply ashamed of how I treated you, of how I let Stephanie treat you. There's no excuse for it." The sincerity in his voice touched something in me that had remained frozen since that terrible day. "No," I agreed, "there isn't. I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did. The selfishness, the ingratitude." He gestured toward the house. "You gave up everything for me, and I threw it back in your face." As I looked at my son, I saw beyond the man to the boy he had been. The child who had cried when he accidentally stepped on an ant, who had saved his allowance to buy Thomas a birthday present, who had always had a tender heart beneath his more recent materialistic exterior. "What happened to you, Jackson?" I asked softly. "You weren't raised to be this way." He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I got lost somewhere along the way. The job, the pressure to succeed, keeping up with Stephanie's expectations. I lost sight of what really matters." For the first time since the housewarming party, I reached out and took my son's hand. It was an instinctive gesture, the muscle memory of motherhood that decades of love had inscribed in my body. "I miss Dad," Jackson said suddenly. He would have set me straight before things got so messed up. "Yes," I agreed, my own eyes filling with tears. "He would have." We sat together on the porch swing as the afternoon light shifted through the trees, beginning the long, complex process of finding our way back to each other. Not as we had been before. That relationship was gone forever, but as something new, something tempered by pain but potentially stronger for having been broken and mended. 6 months after reclaiming the lakeside house, I stood in my kitchen arranging freshly cut flowers for the garden party I was hosting that afternoon. The scent of baking cookies filled the air, mingling with the fragrance of roses and lavender from the garden. Through the window, I could see Arthur setting up additional chairs on the patio, his movements deliberate and careful. Our friendship had blossomed slowly, like the perennial garden we had planted together along the lakeshore. Arthur, a widower of 8 years, understood grief and renewal in ways few others could. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, content to share quiet evenings discussing books or working side by side in the garden. In recent weeks, our relationship had evolved into something deeper, though we both approached this new chapter with the caution of those who have known profound loss. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Jackson stood on the porch, a potted plant in his hands. "Hydrangeas," he said, offering the blue blooms. "For your garden. The nursery said they do well in partial shade." "They're beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Come in. Arthur's out back setting up." Jackson followed me through the house, his eyes taking in the changes I had made over the months. Gone were the stark modern furnishings Stephanie had preferred, replaced by comfortable, elegant pieces that reflected my more traditional taste. Family photographs lined the hallway, including several of Thomas that I had carefully preserved through each move. "The house feels like you now," Jackson observed as we stepped onto the patio. "Warm. Welcoming." Arthur looked up from arranging chairs and came over to greet Jackson with a firm handshake. The two men had met several times during Jackson's increasingly frequent visits, initially circling each other warily before developing a cautious rapport. "Good to see you, Jackson. How's the new position working out?" Arthur asked. After the separation from Stephanie, Jackson had left his high-pressure accounting firm for a smaller company with a focus on nonprofit organizations. The salary was lower, but the work allowed him to use his skills to help causes he believed in. "It's challenging in the best way," Jackson replied. "We're helping a literacy foundation set up financial systems this month. Makes the spreadsheets feel worthwhile." The transformation in my son over the past 6 months had been gradual, but profound. The materialistic young man who had valued appearances above all else was being replaced by someone more reminiscent of the thoughtful boy I had raised. The painful lesson of losing the house, followed by the collapse of his marriage, had forced Jackson to re-evaluate his priorities in ways that mere parental advice never could have accomplished. Guests began arriving for the garden party, a mix of neighbors, friends from my volunteer work, and members of the book club I had joined. Margaret arrived with her husband Frank, immediately pulling me aside for a private word. "He looks good," she said, nodding toward Jackson who was helping Arthur serve drinks. "More like himself." "He's trying," I acknowledged. "It's a process." "And you?" Margaret studied my face closely. "You're glowing, Eleanor. Happiness suits you." I smiled, unable to deny the observation. At 69, I had found an unexpected new chapter in life. The lakeside house that had been the site of such betrayal had transformed into a home filled with genuine friendships, meaningful activities, and a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before Thomas's illness. As the afternoon progressed, I watched Jackson move among my friends, polite and engaged in a way that Stephanie never would have been with old people. He seemed particularly interested in Arthur's stories of his years teaching history at the university, asking thoughtful questions and listening attentively to the answers. Later, as the party wound down and most guests had departed, Jackson and I found ourselves alone by the lake's edge. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the water, creating a moment of tranquil beauty. "I never thanked you," Jackson said suddenly. "For the party? It was nothing."
"No."
He shook his head. "For the lesson. The hardest, most important lesson anyone has ever taught me." I turned to face him, surprised by the direction of his thoughts. "When you took back the house," he continued, "it felt like the end of the world. I was so angry, so hurt. I couldn't understand how my own mother could do that to me." He paused, skipping a stone across the calm surface of the lake. "But as the months passed, I began to see it differently. You gave me something no one else could." "What was that?" I asked softly. "The chance to recognize what I was becoming. The opportunity to change course before I lost myself completely." He met my eyes directly. "You could have given in, transferred the deed, enabled me to continue down that path with Stephanie. Most parents would have. But you loved me enough to say no, to let me face the consequences of my actions." The realization that Jackson truly understood the motivation behind my difficult decision brought tears to my eyes. I had acted partly out of self-preservation, yes, but also out of a deeper, more difficult form of maternal love. The kind that allows a child to experience necessary pain for the sake of growth. "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "Every instinct told me to protect you, to give you what you wanted." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it so remarkable that you didn't." We stood in companionable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight shimmer on the water. The garden party continued behind us, soft laughter and conversation drifting from the patio where Margaret and Arthur were deep in discussion. "Stephanie's engaged again," Jackson said suddenly, "to an investment banker. They're buying a penthouse downtown. Are you okay with that?" I asked carefully. He considered the question seriously before answering. Yes, I think I am. We wanted different things, fundamental things that no amount of compromise could reconcile. I hope she finds happiness in the life she's chosen. His maturity in discussing the failed marriage impressed me. The bitter anger that had characterized his early comments about Stephanie after their separation had evolved into something more measured and reflective. And what about you? I asked. What do you want now? Jackson smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. To build a life that would make Dad proud. To do work that matters. To eventually find someone who values the same things I do. He glanced back toward the house. To be worthy of being your son again. You never stopped being my son, I said gently, even at the worst moments. I know, but I stopped deserving to be. There's a difference. As the evening concluded, Jackson helped Arthur and me clean up the remnants of the party. The easy companionship between the three of us felt natural, unforced in a way that interactions with Stephanie had never been. Before leaving, Jackson suggested we plant the hydrangeas together the following weekend. I found some articles about proper planting techniques, he said. The soil pH affects the bloom color. It's actually fascinating. The enthusiastic interest in gardening, something Jackson had dismissed as old people stuff during his marriage, was yet another sign of his changing priorities. After he left, Arthur and I sat on the porch swing, enjoying the evening breeze off the lake. His hand found mine in the gathering darkness, a comfortable, reassuring presence. You've done a remarkable thing with your son, he observed quietly. Not many parents have the courage to set those kinds of boundaries. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, I admitted. Harder than losing Thomas in some ways. Grief is devastating, but it's clean. The pain of deliberately causing your child suffering, even for their own good. That's a different kind of anguish. Arthur nodded, understanding in his eyes. The truest form of love sometimes looks nothing like love on the surface. His words captured perfectly what I had come to understand through this difficult journey. Love wasn't always gentle or accommodating. Sometimes it was firm, unyielding, even seemingly harsh in its boundaries. Sometimes the greatest act of love was refusing to enable destructive patterns, even when that refusal caused pain to all involved. In the years since the disastrous housewarming party, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. The luxury house by the lake had become a true home, filled with friendship, purpose, and even the tender beginnings of new love. My relationship with Jackson, though changed forever, was evolving into something more authentic and equal than our previous dynamic. Most importantly, I had discovered a strength within myself that decades of putting others first had obscured. The woman who had once emptied her savings account to buy her son $1 million house had learned to value herself, to set boundaries, to recognize the difference between generosity and self-erasure. As Arthur and I watched the first stars appear above the lake, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful journey that had led to this peaceful moment. Life had not unfolded as I had planned or expected, but perhaps it had unfolded exactly as it needed to. What do you think about setting boundaries with family members? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt someone you love for their own good? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful new beginnings.